I always knew Rolex were big, but I didn't know they were this big. And it kind of makes sense. At the start of doing this channel, I used to do a lot of interviews with watch CEOs or senior people within watch companies. Off camera, we'd talk about different watch brands. And whenever Rolex came into the conversation, their tone would change. They suddenly became quite serious. It got weird, and it kind of came across as if they were a bit scared of Rolex. Now I kind of see why. When I first started out on YouTube, I thought, my channel's growing quite quickly. Not Nico Leonard quickly, but it relatively quickly within the niche that we're playing with. Initially, I thought, maybe people like the content that I'm making. It later turns out, I realized that, no, Rolex is just absolutely massive. And because I make content about things that I'm just interested in, as opposed to news or trying to have a broad scope on something, it turns out that the rest of the world is quite interested in the same thing. Sports watches from Rolex. A lot of people compare Rolex to Omega or Rolex to Grand Seiko, and it makes sense because there are a lot of similarities. All three of these brands make superb sports watches, but honestly, there is nothing like Rolex. As a company, as a powerhouse, there is nothing comparable. And I don't say that as a Rolex fanboy. I often label myself as a Rolex fanboy because there's a lot of watches that I like from Rolex. Truth be told, there's also a lot of watches that I absolutely detest from Rolex. And I also detest their customer experience. I say that as a fact. Rolex is an absolute powerhouse within the watch industry, and there is no other brand that comes close to the power of Rolex. And that makes for an interesting debate or an interesting viewpoint. This could genuinely change the way that you see Rolex, the way that you view the brand. As I mentioned at the start, I've always known Rolex were a powerful company, but I didn't realize how powerful until me and the guys over at About Effing Time did an episode about Rolex, and we brought up some facts that were put together by Morgan Stanley. As you can see, Rolex makes up 28.8% of the entire Swiss watch industry. Position number 2 is Omega, and they make up 7.5%. That isn't even on the scale of Rolex. If we look at that 28.8%, that means that more than 1 in every £4 that is spent on a Swiss watch is spent on a Rolex. That's crazy. Especially when you think how hard it is to buy a Rolex. Or maybe it isn't that hard. Maybe they just go to the wrong people. Now, to be clear, we aren't talking about the pre-owned market. We aren't talking about grey market prices. This is retail price. This is when a Submariner costs $7,500. This is when a Daytona costs $12,000, which makes this even more mind-blowing. It also highlights how, if we look at the numbers of Omega versus Rolex, Omega make just over 500,000 watches, Rolex makes an estimated just over 1 million watches. So we can comfortably say that Rolex produces twice as many watches as Omega, yet they have a significantly larger piece of the pie. Financially, Rolex is nearly 4 times the size of Omega. Now, before the Omega fanboys get upset, I am absolutely, let me put on an Omega. I am absolutely not bashing Omega. This isn't talking about the quality of products. As you can see, Audemars Piguet, Vacheron Constantin, Richard Mille, and JLC are much lower down in this pie chart than Rolex. This is nothing to do with quality. This is nothing to do with luxury. This is simply down to who makes the most money within the Swiss watch industry. To put more context around the size and power of Rolex, Omega, number 2 position within this chart, is part of the Swatch group. They own Omega, they own Tissot, Longines, and Breguet, amongst many others. But despite the fact that Swatch group own a brand at the number 2 position and at the number 4 position, Rolex took an extra $1 billion on top of what the entire Swatch group took in 2021. That's quite remarkable. So with Rolex's mammoth size comes this big amount of power. They get to choose. They can be, and they are very picky about who their authorized dealers are. And they then get to choose where they sit within their boutiques. They get to choose which brands are located around them. This is why I think watch brands are scared of Rolex. They want to be in the dealers. They want to be alongside Rolex, or at least as close as possible to Rolex as they can be. There's no easier way to sell a Bremont or a Breitling than being close to a Rolex area and the salesperson being able to say, sorry, sir, no, you can't walk in and buy yourself a Submariner. There's a 2-year wait, or even better, the wait list on the Submariner is now closed. But may I introduce you to a Bremont something or a Breitling whatever? Not only does Rolex pretty much guarantee the success of its authorized dealers, but it's also helping to sell watches from the brands which are harder to sell or perhaps more unknown, like Bremont. This is why I think senior watch people within watch companies come across scared when they're talking about Rolex. But it's not just the watch dealers or the watch brands that are scared of Rolex or that have to kind of bow to Rolex. It's watch press as well. As I mentioned at the start, when I started this channel, I thought people were enjoying my content. Looking back, no, they're horribly cringeworthy. They are technically terrible videos, but people gravitate towards conversations around Rolex. People are unlikely to consume content if it isn't around Rolex. A lot of people get upset when Rolex is mentioned in the video because a lot of people dislike Rolex because of the sheer power that they have. But the reality is that people don't watch content unless it is connected to Rolex or Omega or Tudor, but Rolex in particular. For example, have a look at this Glashütte original CQ Panorama date video that I did. Absolutely love this watch, and legitimately I compared it to a Rolex Submariner. I titled this video Better Than a Rolex, Glashütte original CQ Panorama date. The 2 years that it's been up, it's had 157,000 views. Now, had I given it a more clinical title, like the guys over at Watchbox, and just called it the Glashütte original CQ Panorama date, reference number, and review, they've had their video up for 1 year, and it's had a mere 17,000 views. Two channels are very different. They use their channel to support their sales. I use my channel to create content. So it's a very different model, but that highlights the difference between simply having the name of something like a Glashütte original or having it connected to something like Rolex. Personally, I don't understand why people get so upset when Rolex is mentioned or Rolex is compared to a certain watch brand. If Rolex are factually this large within the Swiss watch industry, it makes sense that they are essentially the benchmark of watchmaking. It's like if you have to deliver a presentation to your boss, and last time you delivered a presentation to your boss said, could I have a printout of that? Because I like to make my own notes as you're going through it. You're going to go into the next presentation for your boss. Do you print the presentation out for your boss or not? Of course you do. You'd be utterly stupid to not print that presentation out. If you know how to make a success of something and you choose not to do that, then you're being stupid. That's the same thing here. If I know people are more likely to see this video about a CQ Panorama date, an absolutely gorgeous watch, arguably far superior than a Rolex, why not add Rolex to the title? It just makes sense. I say that. There is a limit. I know that if I do the shock face in a video thumbnail, that more people will click on it. I can't bring myself to do the shock face. I show my face, but I guess everyone's got a limit. What do you think of Rolex? Has this sheer size of Rolex changed your viewpoint of it? It's understandable why people dislike Rolex because of this sheer power. I kind of get it. It's kind of being rebellious towards it, but they also make a great product. It's a tricky one. Let me know your thoughts. Drop a comment down below. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button. If you like the style of this video, then hit the subscribe button down there and that little bell icon to get notifications when I drop a new video. If you want to check out the podcast that I'm part of, About Effing Time, just search that wherever you watch your podcast. Check out the YouTube channel. It's much more enjoyable seeing it as video. If you're on Instagram, give me a follow at Bark and Jack, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.